She's a very kinky girl, the kind you don't take home to mother.
The moment that line dropped in the summer of 1981, everything changed. It wasn't just a song. It was a declaration, a dare, a drumbeat of disruption. Rick James didn't ask for permission to enter the spotlight. He kicked the doors down and lit the stage on fire. With his long, braided hair, leather-clad body, and wild, rebellious attitude, Rick was unlike anything the mainstream had ever seen. He was bold, brilliant, and dangerous, a fire starter in a world of carefully polished pop acts, a walking contradiction, equal parts seductive showman, tortured artist, and chaotic force of nature. At his peak, he could fill stadiums and start scandals in the same breath. He was the man behind genre-bending hits like Super Freak, Give It to Me, Baby, Mary Jane, and Cold-Blooded. But behind the hits was a life filled with inner torment, addiction, betrayal, reinvention, and some of the most infamous stories in music history. There were hotel rooms destroyed, lawsuits, arrests, wild parties that made rock stars blush. And then there were the rumors, whispered tales of confrontations with Prince, complicated love affairs with protégés, and a fiery temper that could turn a celebration into a crime scene. But what made Rick James unforgettable wasn't just the chaos. It was the music, the raw funk, the electrifying performances, the sense that, for all his flaws, Rick James truly believed in the power of sound to set people free, even if he couldn't always free himself. He once said, "Cocaine is a hell of a drug."
Cocaine is a hell of a drug.
A quote later made legendary in the now iconic Dave Chappelle skit. But long before that punchline, it was a quiet confession, a glimpse of the man behind the myth. So who was Rick James, really? A musical genius misunderstood? A self-saboteur who couldn't escape his own darkness? Or a revolutionary artist who burned too bright for this world? This is the real, untamed, and unforgettable story of Rick James, the man who made funk dangerous again and lived every lyric he ever wrote, for better or worse. And if you love uncovering the real stories behind the voices that shaped music history, hit that subscribe button and join us here on Retro Waves, where legends live on. Before the silk shirts, before the platinum records, before the courtroom drama and iconic catchphrases, there was just a boy named James Ambrose Johnson, Jr. Born on February 1st, 1948, in Buffalo, New York, Rick James didn't come into the world with a silver spoon, but he came in with fire in his blood. Buffalo was a tough place, brutally cold in winter, racially divided, and filled with economic hardship. Rick grew up in the projects of the East Side, surrounded by poverty, but also by strength. His mother, Mabel Gladden, was his rock, a fiercely independent woman who worked as a dancer, a numbers runner for the mafia, and a single mother raising 8 children. Mabel didn't play. She was elegant, street-smart, and fearless, traits her son would later embody in full technicolor. She made sure Rick was exposed to jazz, classical music, and gospel. She brought him along when she collected mob debts in Buffalo's dark alleyways and smoky bars. This wasn't just parenting, it was survival, and it shaped Rick's entire world view. He once said, "I didn't grow up with Disneyland. I grew up with the real." And the real, for Rick, meant fighting, hustling, and dreaming bigger than the city limits. Rick's love for music bloomed early. By the age of 10, he was obsessed with artists like Nat King Cole, Miles Davis, and Jackie Wilson. But his heroes weren't just black. He worshipped Frank Sinatra, Elvis, and later, the Rolling Stones. He wasn't trying to fit in anywhere. He wanted to create his own lane. By 13, Rick had taught himself to play drums and started sneaking into local nightclubs to jam with older musicians. His teenage years were split between schoolyard fights, short stints in jail, and hours in makeshift studios playing bass and writing songs that no one would hear. Not yet, anyway. He had the raw talent, but trouble followed him like a shadow. At just 15, Rick lied about his age and enlisted in the U.S. Navy Reserve, hoping it would provide structure. It didn't. He hated authority, hated being told what to do, hated the uniform. He went AWOL, a decision that would follow him for decades. By the late 1960s, Rick was already burning bridges and dodging consequences, but his ambition was bigger than the chaos. He fled the U.S. for Toronto, Canada, hoping to escape the Navy, the draft, and his past. What he found there would change his life. In Toronto, Rick reinvented himself as Ricky Matthews and joined a multicultural rock band called the Mynah Birds. Their sound was electric, part Motown, part British Invasion, part underground rebellion. And in a twist that would later become rock legend, Neil Young was the band's guitarist. Yes, that Neil Young. They signed a record deal with Motown Records in 1966, making Rick James one of the first black artists to cross into the world of psychedelic rock and punk-infused soul. It could have been his big break, but destiny had other plans. Just as their debut single was being prepared for release, Rick was arrested, caught by U.S. authorities for deserting the Navy years earlier. The band collapsed, the contract dissolved, and Rick's shot at early stardom went up in smoke. He was devastated, but not defeated. Over the next few years, Rick would roam between Detroit, Los Angeles, and Toronto, writing songs, crashing on couches, and soaking in every genre he could. He played backup for Bobby Taylor and the Vancouvers, worked odd jobs at Motown under assumed names, and tried to stay one step ahead of both the law and his own self-destructive impulses. He would later claim that during this lost decade, he secretly wrote songs for other artists and was kept out of the spotlight by Motown because he was too wild, too weird, too ahead of his time. Whether those claims were true or simply part of the Rick James mythology, one thing was certain. The industry didn't know what to do with him, but he never stopped believing he'd get his moment. And when that moment came, it would be louder, funkier, and messier than anyone could have imagined. After his hopes with the Mynah Birds crumbled and his brief time in military custody ended, Rick James was back on the streets, but not without a mission. He had tasted what it felt like to be on the cusp of greatness, and now he wanted more. The problem was, the music industry didn't quite know what to do with him. He was too funky for rock, too rebellious for soul, too raw for the Motown assembly line, too black for mainstream rock radio, and too out there for traditional R&B. But Rick didn't care. He bounced between Toronto, Detroit, and Los Angeles, doing anything to stay connected to music. He formed and disbanded band after band, names like Salt and Pepper, The Great White Cane, and Hot Lips, each group louder and more eccentric than the last. None of them stuck. But Rick used each failure as fuel. His style kept evolving. He started combining the heavy guitar riffs of Jimi Hendrix with the funky bass lines of Sly Stone and the glam fashion of David Bowie. He began building what would eventually become his signature sound, punk funk, a fusion of defiance, sex, soul, and street heat. And while he hustled his way through every gritty stage and dingy club, he was also networking, writing, and waiting. Behind the scenes, Rick was ghostwriting songs for Motown artists. Rumor has it he even helped rework tracks for acts like The Miracles and The Spinners, though he was rarely credited. Some insiders claimed Berry Gordy didn't want Rick in the spotlight because he was too unpredictable. Others said Rick was simply ahead of his time, and the industry wasn't ready. One story that still makes the rounds in Motown circles? That Rick once stormed out of a Motown studio session mid-recording, screaming that the label was trying to bleach out his sound to make him more radio-friendly. True or not, it shows the growing tension between Rick's artistic vision and Motown's commercial machine. By the mid-1970s, Rick had become something of an underground legend in the industry. He was the guy everyone knew, the one with the killer live shows, the dangerous charm, and the wild parties. But still, no breakout, no record deal, no radio hits, and the frustrations began to boil over. Rick started spiraling, emotionally and chemically. Cocaine was already in the picture, as were long nights, toxic relationships, and mounting debt. He was burning out fast. Then came his second chance. In 1977, Rick James returned to Motown once again, this time under its subsidiary label, Gordy Records. But now things were different. He wasn't a hired hand. He was the main attraction. He signed a deal as an artist, a producer, and a visionary. He had total creative control, something nearly unheard of at the time for a new artist. But with that power came pressure. Motown gave him a shot, but they weren't putting their full weight behind him yet. If he failed this time, there'd be no coming back. So Rick went all in. He assembled his own band, the Stone City Band, hand-picked from players he knew in Buffalo and L.A. Together, they crafted an explosive, genre-bending debut album filled with raw funk, sexy grooves, and unfiltered attitude. The result was Come Get It, a record that would change everything. But before the fame came knocking, Rick James was still that hungry kid from Buffalo, armed with a dream, a dangerous ego, and just enough heartbreak to make the world finally listen. With the 1978 release of Come Get It, Rick James finally erupted into mainstream music. His single You and I topped the R&B charts and introduced his explosive blend of rock, soul, and unapologetic sexuality to the world.
You and I together till the 60s.
But the real turning point came with 1981's Street Songs, fueled by Give It to Me, Baby,
Give it to me, baby. Give it to me, baby. I bet you. I make it.
Ghetto Life,
Get to life. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and Super Freak.
She's a super freak, she's super freaking out.
The album became a platinum smash, loud, funky, and irresistible. The bass line of Super Freak, recorded in a single take with backing vocals from The Temptations, became one of the most iconic in pop history. Yet, behind the scenes, Rick's lifestyle spun out of control. Lavish parties, drug binges, and explosive behavior became daily occurrences. He was both the life of the party and the storm that destroyed it. Rumors ran wild, clashes with Prince, controlling behavior in the studio, even stories of guns in business meetings. Whether true or exaggerated, Rick didn't shy away. He leaned into his myth, becoming a symbol of both brilliance and danger. At his peak, Rick James wasn't just a star, he was a force. Super Freak redefined funk's reach, and alongside him stood Tina Marie, his fiery protégé. Their bond was electric, complicated, and heavily rumored to be romantic. Songs like Fire and Desire didn't just hint at emotion, they revealed it. Rick also made hits for others. He produced Party All the Time for Eddie Murphy and collaborated with Val Young and the Mary Jane Girls. His feud with Prince added fuel to his legend, with both men redefining what black artists could do in the 80s. But the pressure to maintain his crown weighed heavily, and Rick, fueled by cocaine and ego, began unraveling, musically, emotionally, and spiritually. In the mid-'80s, Rick James was still churning out hits, Cold-Blooded, Glow, Dance With Me, but the tide was shifting. Hip-hop and pop were taking over, and Rick's sound began to fade from the mainstream. Yet his legacy was everywhere. He helped bring funk to MTV, pushed boundaries for black artists, and laid groundwork for artists like MC Hammer, who sampled Super Freak in You Can't Touch This, a deal that later earned Rick millions. Even in decline, his influence soared, but so did his isolation. The drugs, the paranoia, the missed opportunities, they caught up to him fast. The breaking point came in the early '90s. Rick James was arrested twice for assault and kidnapping during drug-fueled binges. The trials were ugly. The public was shocked. He was convicted and sentenced to over 5 years in prison. Fans were left torn. Could they reconcile the artist they loved with the man who had fallen so far? While in prison, Rick reflected. He wrote. He sobered up. But the damage to his reputation and his body was irreversible. Rick was released in 1996. Though his music no longer dominated charts, a surprise revival came from comedy. Dave Chappelle's I'm Rick James, B-Egg sketch in 2004. Rick played along, embracing the humor and the nostalgia. He made a few final performances, including a powerful reunion with Tina Marie at the BET Awards. But on August 6, 2004, Rick James died in his sleep from heart failure. He was 56. Drugs were found in his system, not in fatal doses, but enough to prove his past never quite left him. Rick James lived loud, fell hard, and inspired millions. He was brilliant, complicated, and unforgettable. Now we want to hear from you. What's your favorite Rick James song, moment, or memory? Drop it in the comments. And if you believe legends deserve to be remembered with honesty and heart, like and subscribe to Retro Waves, where the stories behind the music live on.